What a great session. We are so proud of all of you and your work. So let me invite all the speakers. We are running behind, but I think we should still take a few minutes to see if there are any questions. Ankur, Jean, Thomas? Any questions for our preeminent speakers? Oh, come on, CSAIL. No. I can't believe that there are no questions. Mark, you had a question? No, okay, there's. Okay, go ahead.
Was there any, like, if you go back 40, 30, 50 years, like things that you rather thought would really take off that never really did?
So the question is, are there questions we believed would take off 40, 50 years ago, but that actually didn't?
No.
All right.
No, that's a good question. I guess that what always surprised me was that some of the ideas would take off, but in a very different way from anything that I had anticipated. Okay, I was, these wonderful people actually came up with answers to problems. I never did. I always came up with problems. And somebody come up with the answer. So for example, motion planning, the thing that ended up being successful are algorithms that would have been crazy had I done them at the, in 1970, 1980, because they were randomized algorithms that only make sense for very fast computers. And didn't make sense at the time. So what was interesting, one thing that's interesting is that the idea of motion planning took off, but the algorithms always ended up being something completely different, which is, I guess, interesting at some level.
So I have a question for all of you. And my question is the genie question. Suppose I were a genie, and I told you that I could grant you any research dream, desire you have 5 years from now. What would you ask me for? Magdalena, we start with, or who has the microphone? We should start, or maybe, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a big question. Like, I mean, the first thing to ask would be like, money to support whatever research. But in terms of like research result, I think there's just so many questions. So like thinking about like society at large, it's of course making sure that AI is responsible and does the right thing. Thinking about like my area of data management is making sure that we actually can integrate all of this data and actually make sense of it. I think some of those kind of open research questions.
Great, Jean?
Thank you. So for me, it's greedily a mindset question, because I think that research is producing some great minds. A lot of people want to work on cool technologies, and I see a lot of really great technologists going and kind of working on applications that are not the ones I would want them to work on. And so one wish I have is for the great technologists coming out of CSAIL and other places to really think critically about why they're building, what they're building for, and really, for CSAIL to keep up the wonderful training on what is the biggest impact problem to solve. And for me specifically, I think there are a few areas. One, explainability in AI. Another, general explainability of software systems. These are not often the sexiest areas, but I greedily want people to work on them.
We need it anyway. Raluca?
For me, I would love to have more massive compute cheaply. For example, being able to run all these, GPT models, the inference and the training, and without having to expend so many resources and running against bottlenecks, and to be able to run cryptographic protocols without having to, pay extra. So yes, massive compute cheaply is my
Definitely
dream.
A research cloud for the benefit of all universities. Ankur.
So I think my dream is to have fair, trustworthy machine learning that we develop through having a deeper understanding of what's going on. Maybe we can live in a world where we don't just run gradient descent on huge models on data we don't know and pray, and maybe there's a space for theoretical computer science to contribute an understanding of doing things better, not just the way that they are.
Amazing. Thomas?
I guess I'd like to see robots really work. The thing that I run across every day is that I speak to the computer vision people and they tell me they've solved computer vision. But somehow when I try it, it never works. So I would like to bridge that gap.
All right, there's another question. Here you go. Over there, yes.
I can just shout. I had a question for Gene, but maybe anyone can speak to it. One way to think about the cool things you talked about is a transition from in vitro to in vivo thinking about systems, right? So I'm wondering if there's other parts of computer science that could benefit from this kind of thinking. Maybe it relates to what Tomas was just talking about as well, right? Solving things in the
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And when I was an undergrad, I took a course when I was at Harvard with Radhika Nagpal in biologically inspired computing. That was very inspiring to me. When I was a grad student, Martin Reinhard was working on failure oblivious computing, which really just turned a lot of assumptions upside down. Like, you think code should be correct. Why don't you just return 0 in your space shuttle and see if it crashes? But I think this idea of treating software like an organism and something that we're studying from the outside is very interesting to me. I think the shift to statistical techniques for understanding is very good for that. I'd also be curious if the rest of the people on this panel have things to say.
Well, if not, Dave Clark has a question.
I was going to follow up on that comment about you wanting massive computing, because I'm just thinking about, well, just wait 20 years, which of course we've been doing for 50 years. I mean, in my own area, we knew we could do video over the internet in 1980. We just had to wait 40 years. So, but the more sophisticated question is waiting 20 years going to continue to work? Or, in fact, do we have to think differently about how we're going to get the infrastructure to improve? And your comment, I want massive computing. You know, I'm wondering whether just waiting 20 years is going to be enough, or whether we actually have to rethink how it is that we get the computational power that we need, because we obviously have been predicting the death of Moore's Law and all that kind of blah, blah, blah. But what's the trick to waiting 20 years from now? And what'll that help us do that we can't do now?
I think the trick is that we never really truly just wait, right? We work hard, and I definitely think that to have massive compute cheaply, we need some very different technology than what we have today. There's a lot of interesting breakthroughs happening, for example, in photonics computation or quantum computation, but I definitely think that to make a radical change in the amount of compute we get for a certain cost we need a very different mindset. So maybe that's the advice for the students, is to pursue some very bold agendas that look promising in this direction.
So I will just add to that I believe we need new ideas in AI, in infrastructure, and we also need a different mentality with respect to how we create shared systems that support the research community. Okay, with this, let's thank these wonderful speakers again, and it's been such an inspiring and rich session. Let's take a break. We are behind schedule. Let's meet here at 11:30. And we will cut a little bit from lunch. If you should be inclined to experiment with an augmented reality system, in front of the gates elevators, we have an installation called the Riddler's Dilemma, where you can share some of your memories.